For example, a young girl who wants to get married in a hurry, but then she can't wait too long. As years pass by, instead of asking God to give her a young Christian man that will be, according to the scriptures, the right partner for life, she gets married to someone who's unsaved. And that kind of mistake, made in panic or in fear or because of the tension of the times, will bring needless heartaches. God can help you. God can save that marriage. God can intervene in your life of your husband or wife. The repercussions are often much. That is why we have to be careful. That when we are faced with a crisis experience, when we have to decide, let's not be hasty. If there's fear involved, take time to pray so that God can give faith to replace that fear. And if there's a decision to be made, the time factor need not be hurried. Don't act in fear and decide something in haste, because you have much, much time to regret later. Maybe I'm speaking to someone in that situation right now. And perhaps you're thinking, maybe I should decide something quickly, but I would say, be careful. It's better to be slow and to be deliberate than to make a mistake from which it is very hard to reconstruct the steps backward. The second kind of mistake that we make is called the good intention mistakes. Very often, it is something we do with the best of motives, best of intentions, but still it goes wrong. Intentions are not always right. We want to do what is right, but the repercussions of what we do is not the best. I think of Moses, the typical example. When he was in Pharaoh's household, he looked one day and saw an Egyptian whipping Israeli, and his sense of justice came forth, and he was so angry, he took the Egyptian and smote him and killed him. He acted in haste. And he thought that would attract the nation of Israel to think of a man who would try to stand for their cause. Sometime later, he found two Israelis fighting, and he said, "Why are you two brothers fighting among yourselves?" And they said, "Who are you to be a ruler over us?" And immediately Moses realized the news of what he had done would spread. Pharaoh would hear about it, and he would be punished severely, maybe by death. So Moses ran into the wilderness, in the countryside of Midian. It took the dealings of God many, many years later to make him the kind of man that could lead 2 million people out of Egypt. He took 40 years. He thought he was somebody. He spent the next 40 years in the backside of a desert finding out he was a nobody. Then he spent the 40 years and more later on discovering what God can do with a nobody. So sometimes with good intentions, we go ahead of God. God can still use you, but the time is necessary for God to deal with us, to bring us to the place where we can be useful to God. You cannot hasten the process. You can't take shortcuts. Before God can use a person, the time factor has to be played out. The lessons have to be learned. All the self-confidence, the cockiness and pride has to be somehow eradicated before God can anoint us for service. The third one that we make is what we call the negligent mistake. It's the cause of laziness. The cause actually is because we're lazy. The negligent mistakes are made because we don't want to work. We don't want to take the time to make the right decisions, and we don't want to follow through with those decisions. So we lack discipline. We lack the steadfastness, the single-mindedness that's required in order to do the right thing always. We neglect. I think of King David, great man of God, mighty man of God. Busy conquering neighboring nations, busy securing the borders of Israel, busy handling the affairs of state, busy, busy, busy. He forgot he had two sons that were growing up in his household. One was called Adonijah, and the other one was Absalom. Two sons. They grew up and were rebellious. Both these sons, at different times, brought grief to David. They wanted to take his throne. Can you imagine a father facing a grief like that? You bring up a son or sons, you treat them, you expect them to help you. But those two sons turned against their own father, and basically because he neglected them. And there are many, many Christian homes where parents are busy making money, busy with their careers, busy with social activities, and sometimes even busy in church. They forget they have children at home that are growing up. And they realize mom and daddy have no time for them. Too busy to listen to their cry. Too busy to talk to them. Too busy to pray with them. Too busy to be involved in their life. Too busy to go and see a school function with them. Too busy. Then you wonder why, when they grow older, they become rebellious against you and against the God you said you serve. Because the mistakes we make are negligent. Am I speaking to you today? Are you a mother and a father that takes the time to disciple your children and nurture them? Or are you too busy? I'm challenging you today, right now. Don't neglect this. This is a terrible mistake to make. The repercussions are awesome and they're terrible. Sometimes it's hard to set the clock back. It's very, very hard. Very, very hard. There was a man that I know of who had an international ministry, taking care of children in orphanages. His children at home were forgotten. He somehow had a funny idea that he took care of the orphans elsewhere, God would take care of his children. The children grew up, and two of them grew up rebellious, took drugs, everything else. And one of them, in anger, wrote a book against the father that caused his ministry to crumble, outlining all the times that child wanted a father's love and care and concern, but it was always somewhere else taking care of other people's children, or children that had no parents, while he neglected his own. Mistakes like that, friend, are awesome. The fourth mistake that we make is what we call the unrestrained curiosity mistake. It's a mistake made because we want sensation, because we have desires, or maybe because of the demonic influence that plays upon our mind and our spirit. But we want to learn and find out more. It's like Saul, who wanted to find out about Samuel. He went to a witch at Endor and asked the witch to bring up Samuel from the grave. And what happened was a demonic spirit took on the personality of Samuel. And because he did that, he was condemned and he died shortly